here? Why are you shaking? Are you okay? Wake up.
These sounds were among the first things I ever experienced from the world of Nirn, nearly 20 years ago. Back then, I couldn't get enough of Tamriel, and today, I want to talk a bit about my plans to return to that time and the Noob's Elder Scrolls Anthology. The Elder Scrolls likely needs no introduction. I mean, come on. It's a generation-defining, trend-setting video game franchise that has had an impact on the world for what, nearly 30 years straight? But in case it does, maybe you've heard of it, but never knew much more? Well, let me explain. It's an award-winning RPG game series from Bethesda Studios. It's commercially and often critically successful, with the latest in the franchise in particular, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, winning something like over 300 awards from various gaming outlets. At least, that's what they print in the box and with press now. What that really tangibly means, I'll let you guys decide. When each new game releases, they tend to be at the technological forefront of that era of gaming. It's not something you'd really appreciate looking back at a lot of this stuff, but take something like the release of the third installment, Morrowind. One of its defining characteristics and points of praise was its delivery of a 3D game space unlike any seen before. The titles are comprised of largely action or D&D oriented single-player gameplay set in a large, open-to-explore, sandboxy and highly textured fantasy world. The world is known as Nirn, and most each game has you visit a separate region of one of its major continents, a place known as Tamriel, host to a large variety of species and cultures, usually vying for control in some way or another. That's not exclusively true. The earlier games you can go anywhere you want in the entire continent, but in general that's the place we're at. The games also take place often many years apart from one another, with the player not necessarily having to know what came before or what will come after. One of the big reasons I want to go back and play them right now is to get a sense of that timeline, and just what information was introduced to the player base about this brilliant setting at what point in time. Though I've heard there are often horrendous inconsistencies in the lore, just FYI, between the games. It's better to think really of each Elder Scrolls game as a recollection or an unreliable narration of what actually happened at that point in this fantasy world's history. I believe that once the MMO was coming out, the team had to decipher all existing story and lore content and realized a lot of it just wouldn't work together, and they basically adopted this line of thinking. The fact that these games are only loosely connected and unreliably told is obviously a good reason to ignore any previous installments when waiting for a new one, but as a bit of a geek, I can't help myself really. The series did eventually, as I say, spawn an MMO, which is a genre I'm really familiar with, and is totally on the table to look at one day as far as I'm concerned, though it's not necessarily a part of the main series. There's been loads of odd stuff branching off of the Elder Scrolls over the years, phone games and even a pinball version of Skyrim. Maybe we'll see those, but really, this is about the big five for now. So what is all this about? Well, in the wait for the Elder Scrolls VI, it could be 2, maybe even 4 years away as they supposedly wait for technology to catch up. I want to go back through the series, play them in order, and really become familiar with a setting I'm a fan of, but I'm not a super geek about, yet. Totally chronologically, we're going to start way back with the Elder Scrolls I Arena, and progress through the 1990s, 2000s, up until Skyrim's release and the MMO shortly after. Now, I know what you're thinking, that's a hell of a lot of games, and these games in particular are massive games. Bethesda allowing the player to be free and roam around the continent at their will meant packing each game with enormous amounts of content. But don't worry, my idea here for now is that we play through the main quest, the core experience, the big story of the product, and then, as long as people are enjoying themselves, I'll obviously be going back to do side quests. But for now, I just want to canvas the main experience of the Elder Scrolls. That's not to say I'm not looking forward to the odd excursion here or there. Smaller side quests and mini tasks, absolutely I'm interested in, particularly when they serve the purpose of getting back towards the main story. But I'm not going to spend 20 videos of your time caught on some totally separate big thing when we can do those later if people want them. And I'm pretty sure by the end you will. I know I do. I tend to be pretty exhaustive with the games I play, try to learn as much as possible, reveal all untapped potential, and that really comes into conflict with me when I'm presenting with a sandbox experience. So for now, the idea is the main stories. There are a million ways you could play the Elder Scrolls. Running in blind, just seeing what comes up, wandering around and presenting it to the world. That's cool and all. I tend to go in a bit of a different direction. What I'd like you to feel watching the videos is that you've really learned something more than maybe just playing on your own. That way, it was worth watching. It's my usual style of coverage, and I really want to give you that experience with the Elder Scrolls too. That way, as you watch along, you'll actually come out a bigger nerd knowing more stuff than you would have otherwise. Or, that's the idea. In particular, I love showing what devs wanted us as players to pick up on, but so often we miss. That could be revealed through an external dev comment or more blatant stuff like Easter eggs, and just the more, the better. Another thing I'm really excited in is how these all feel now that we're so far forward in time at the 2020s. How do those earlier games really hold up? We can look at that stuff, kind of like a post-mortem. What terrible mechanics thankfully got phased out over time? Which great mechanics and weapons and ways to play the game got phased out over time, lamentably, perhaps because of pandering to console gamers or whatever else. But I get ahead of myself. The Noob's Anthology will be me taking you through the games. But while I'm a big fan of the games, I'm also kind of a noob. My experience with this series is not perfect. I have huge gaps in what I remember about it. Most titles I haven't touched for years. So as I go and learn and play, so do you. So who's the noob in the title? Well, I guess I'm the noob. And then maybe you're the noob. But by the end, maybe we're not anymore. The Anthology itself, for those who are wondering, is the name of a 2013 box you could buy that included all 5 main games, all their expansions, and possibly their DLCs. That last bit gets a bit complicated. And, well, that's what I'm going to be playing through. That's it, really. You might be thinking about mods. This is a huge franchise for modding. Believe me, I'm well aware. This is really where I came home to shine. I want to be clear, though, that starting out, I'm playing as vanilla as possible. There'll probably be some tweaks to make the games run well, not crash constantly. You'll see very soon with Elder Scrolls 1 Arena that there's many different ways to run it in DOSBox environment. I just want to get the real thing, though. Nothing major, and again, we can look at mods maybe in tandem with side quests or as future things further down the line, if I'm interested. So that's it. To cap off the video, I thought it might be fun to talk in broad strokes about my memories and first impressions of these games going in. Nothing spoilery, but just to set the bar for what I expect right now, and we can see how that might change as we get through the games. Starting with Arena. So Arena is a game that I have played through multiple times in recent history, mostly because I know I want to make videos about it. I've never quite got to the end, but definitely close enough to have experienced all the major mechanics and a variety of different races and class combinations. This is a funny game in that it feels a lot more like a traditional standard dungeon crawling experience than anything like an open world adventure game. Yeah, there is a lot of open world to explore and be interested in, but the main story really is just doing dungeon after dungeon after dungeon, and that's your bread and butter. You can validate a lot of the game just by looking at the wiki and seeing a revealed dungeon map and following that along. It really is that simple. I'll likely do a shorter playthrough on Arena. I'm well aware that there aren't as many nerdy enthusiasts for games this old like I am, so we'll see what we can do to make it digestible. I am quite impressed with Arena, by the way, just how much background and setting building they instantly throw at you. You really can learn a lot, especially if you play with the character creator a lot, but I'll get to that in the nearest videos very soon. It might be interesting for you guys to know that while I got a copy of this with the Anthology box set, it's actually free. Bethesda made it free at the 10th anniversary of the franchise, so that was way back in the early 2000s, but it's true, you can download it on their website and play along if you want to as these videos come out. Moving over to Dagger Fool, well, I have very little to say. Why? It's the ultimate wildcard to me. I have never actually played Dagger Fool. I've only seen vague gameplay and mostly watched speedruns at, like, AGDQ. It reminds me in the footage of some of the other older first-person RPGs I played in this era. There were a lot of them around, some party-based, some single-player, and I definitely enjoyed those when I was younger. How much it holds up will be interesting. I've heard that of all the titles in the franchise, this one is ridiculously punishing. It's kind of like Arena, just expanded in nearly every way. I'm actually quite intimidated, honestly. The fact that this game is kind of an expansion on everything that Arena was good for is quite notable too, as the later installments in the franchise really start to cut back and refine what the Elder Scrolls is all about, much to many die-hard fans' chagrin. We'll see what we think about that as we get there. This game too became free in 2009, if you guys are interested. That was after the 10th anniversary. I wonder if Bethesda have plans for more free releases. But the next one is Morrowind, which I'm sure still sells reasonably well. And I don't know, shouldn't they have done that in 2019 maybe? We're a year past that point already. So let's talk about Morrowind. Well. This was my entry to the series. I didn't really care that it was the third game. I believe that I first saw it because my father had bought it and I would watch him play a bit. I played it way back when it came out. 2002, I think, was the release. Constantly. And it was one of those experiences that really defined the kind of games I like as I go forwards. You can play sound effects from that game to me and I'll explode with nostalgia. You can play the music, of course. And seeing footage of any number of places makes me practically giddy. Even seeing images of the loading screens makes me nostalgic. The game had 2 expansions, and I do remember playing Blood Moon, but not so much Tribunal. Back then, I think I was just excited to explore a new and snowy area. I was really interested in world expansions, and didn't play what might have been the better X-Pack. To be honest with you all, despite the hours I put into Morrowind, I only have fleeting memories of it. There are a lot of them, mind, exploring Balmora or Vivec, joining the Morag Tong, gazing at the stars or hiring Silt Striders, but they're all disconnected vignettes. There's no further detail, like the very vivid image of hacking away at a cliff racer in some indistinct landscape. I'm not sure I could actually tell you the story of the game that well, what the prophecy was all about, what's happening at the Red Mountain and so on. I'm good on the setting in general, but not specific events. I couldn't tell you what kind of character I played, even its race. This was also the first PC game I ever modded. I remember trying to make a playable race, but had no comprehension at the time that you couldn't just add a new race. You had to actually make models and textures. I didn't realize there was a difference. It was ported to the Xbox original a year and a few months later, which sold really well. I have a lot of memories of visiting a friend's house to play his copy on Xbox. I swear, didn't they add cheat codes and stuff like that? Will probably be on the PC version. The well-received Xbox port, I think, is a significant moment for the franchise. After it happened, you could really feel Bethesda thinking a lot more about consoles as they developed the later installments, refining certain things away, changing radically the way the UI would work, and thinking more and more about capturing a new fan base instead of catering to their current one. It was clearly a strategy that worked. Every new release has become epically more successful and widespread than the previous ones. Going to console was probably a part of that. I know that these days, Morrowind looks clunky as hell. The dice roll combat and punishing early game takes some acclimating to. Really, it's about the time they should have gone to a full action RPG instead of keeping some of these more D&D inspired origins. But a lot of ideas in Morrowind, like the lack of level scaling everywhere to make a really punishing world, their methods of fast travel, these are things I'm really on board with, and I miss them in the later releases, so I'm looking forward to playing them there. I'm a big believer that once you're immersed for a while into any specific game's pacing, its controls, its aesthetic, you can become blind to them, even if they are quite poor elements. And then, once you're blind, you start to enjoy it for what it is. And I expect to have the same experience in Morrowind in the 2020s, 2030s, or beyond, as I originally did. Fingers crossed. Maybe it's all just nostalgia. Oblivion. As positively as I have talked about Morrowind, Oblivion is my main home in the series. I still remember the physical Septim coin that came with the collector's edition. I remember spending 15 to 30 minutes at a time waiting for a real player to buffer, just so I could see those amazing pre-release videos showing off the Radiant AI, exploring Aeid ruins, hunting for deer in the forest. I think they came from E3, I'll try to put some footage in the background. Man, the excitement and giddiness I felt to explore Cyrodiil watching those early trailers was from such an early, naive time in my life where I was prone to wonderment. I doubt they'll ever be matched by another game ever again for me. I spent more hours in Oblivion once it released than any other game in this series. Mostly on PC, but even some on the 360 also. I could recall to you the general story really quite well, and the same's true for its many guilds and its side quests. When it came to expansions, truthfully, I did spend a bit less time. Shivering Isles is possibly the best expansion Bethesda ever made for this franchise, in terms of its relative size compared with the base product. But I don't think I ever finished more than one playthrough, and if I did, it was a long time ago. I can't remember much. Night of the Nine, I have pretty good specific memories of though. Oblivion, I have a bit of a guilty pleasure, and a situation I'm trapped by that I know many other people do experience. The past 4 or 5 installs I've spent on it throughout the 2010s, I've probably spent more time modding it than playing it properly. Oblivion modding is my jam. I must have spent hundreds of hours doing it. I'm really familiar with basically all the tools, all the major releases, though I wouldn't have played them all. The number of hours I've spent browsing the Nexus, reading the best of forums about new mods is kind of crazy. My last stint for this was probably in about 2017, not long ago, and yet my actual hours playing Oblivion since this obsession have gone down. Oops, looking forward to get back to that right now when we go to a vanilla playthrough. And lastly, we have Skyrim. I'm the kind of person who feels like Skyrim came out just yesterday. I was a full-fledged adult in the world at the point of this game's release, and I distinctly remember many of my colleagues who had shown no interest in gaming at all, suddenly all fervently discussing Skyrim or booking time off to play Skyrim. I remember the initial trailer reveal extremely clearly and visiting a British gaming convention that allowed people to play a short demo of it. The space between Oblivion's release in 2006 and Skyrim's release in 2011 has to feel like the longest space of time in my life. I'd grown and changed so much between those two periods. It was amazing to me that Bethesda took as long as they did to get Skyrim out at the time, and now, looking back, I realize it wasn't that long of a gap. Suddenly, I also find myself realizing that the space of time between Skyrim and today, where we have no Elder Scrolls 6 yet, has actually become considerably longer. I think I saw an interview recently where Todd Howard mentioned that Skyrim was gonna last people about a decade, and Elder Scrolls 6, they were planning to do the same. As for the game itself, the de facto entry in the series in terms of popular understanding and consumption, I have to say, I didn't play it anywhere near as much as I'd like. I loved it for sure, and the discussions about the series' so-called dumbing down for the console market had become even more prominent now than they had been in Oblivion. This stuff had me keenly engaged, but somehow, I just never got that far. I made it maybe 2/3 of the way through the main story, completed the College of Winterhold stuff, spent a good time exploring the Reach and Markarth, but then I just kind of stopped. I vaguely remember feeling bogged down by all those extra mini-quests and inventory management. I just had a lot of other excitement in my life at this point. I never gave Skyrim a true shot. Even to this day, I've made a few more attempts to return. I had an install or two where I tried to mod it for visual improvements, and that never went much anywhere. I still somewhat follow a few YouTubers who make videos about it, and when I got my Oculus Rift a couple of years back, I did take a stab at making a Skyrim VR mod list. It was kind of fun to now realize there's a full-fledged Skyrim VR title doing that exact thing, which I'd love to try. So that's the franchise, as I remember it, as I've currently experienced it. All those other games I really didn't touch. There's Skyrim VR, there's the pinball game, there's loads of phone games from the Oblivion era. There was actually an Oblivion port to PSP, which I never released, but I think got leaked lately. I'd love to play that. If we're doing everything chronologically, I could slot those in at the appropriate times too. Honestly, as long as it's been since Skyrim came out, and as desperate as people are now for the Elder Scrolls 6, I'm kind of happy that it's taken Bethesda this long. It gives me time to reignite my fanaticism, maybe reignite yours, for a franchise without ever really skipping a beat in all the main releases. So that's it. I hope to see you along for the ride, and in the next video in the playlist, we'll be going back to the beginning. The Elder Scrolls 1 Arena, which actually has some weird trivia about its title. I hope to see you over there.